Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 442. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Sorry about today's show coming out a little late. I'm trying to catch up on the news with the holiday yesterday, so I'm just kind of tackling some of the big stories going on with the war in Ukraine. I think there's a very large escalation that could possibly be happening soon. There is a lot of statements coming out of Kiev, coming out of the West, that are very concerning. Russia warnings the nuclear power plant. So I want to talk about all this on today's show. And it may be just a little bit of a shorter show, but I think it should be a pretty important one anyways. Please share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. And it's up everywhere. You can listen to audio podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_. Now, let's get into the news today. This is, I think, the most, concerning story and what stands out most to me. Russia nuclear official claims Ukraine is planning imminent attack on nuclear plant. An advisor to the director of Russia's nuclear power engineering company claimed Tuesday that Ukraine is planning an imminent attack on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the ZMPP, while Ukraine is accusing Russian forces of plotting to blow up the facility. The ZMPP is in Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia Oblast and has been controlled by Russian forces since March of last year. It has been the scene of fighting throughout the war as Ukraine launched failed attacks on the plant to recapture the facility last fall. At the time, Ukraine blamed shelling on Russian forces. That they were claiming that the Russian forces were shelling the plant that was controlled by Russia, and so that didn't make a whole lot of sense. And it turned out, we got reporting later that Ukraine actually launched offensives on that power plant to try to recapture it. So Russia's nuclear agency advisor claimed Ukraine is planning to use a dirty bomb against the ZMPP, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. And in the nighttime on July 5th, Ukrainian troops will try to attack the ZMPP with the use of a high-precision, long-range weapon and kamikaze drone, he said, according to the Russian news agency TASS. They are planning to airdrop bombs stuffed with radioactive waste that were removed from the South Ukraine nuclear power plant to a military airfield in Ukraine. The standby bombing plan provides for the use of high-precision rockets with a warhead stuffed with nuclear radioactive waste. And so this is interesting because a lot of times, one side or the other will claim that some kind of attack is going to happen on some facility, whether that was the Nord Stream pipelines before that happened, the dam in southern Ukraine before that happened. And of course, there's been warnings throughout the war that there will be attacks on the ZMPP. And there certainly have been attacks by Russian forces captured it. Ukrainian forces have tried to recapture it. So there certainly has been fighting around this plant throughout the war. But at the same time, there's been these claims that one side or the other was going to blow it up. And this is, to my knowledge, the most detailed reports for both sides, really, but from the Russian side, this is definitely the most detailed claim I have seen. Ukrainian President Zielinski claimed Russian forces planned explosives at the ZMPP. He said, "We have information from our intelligence that Russian troops have placed objects resembling explosives on the top of several power units of the ZMPP. The General Staff of Armed Forces of Ukraine said in a statement on Facebook that an attack could happen in the near future and claimed Russia would look like it was Ukrainian shelling. Ukrainian forces made similar claims about explosives being placed at the ZMPP in recent weeks, but the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, that's the international nuclear watchdog, said its experts did not find those devices. And so, this certainly could be a false flag attack coming from Ukraine. They're going to attack it. And from the analysis that I have read about what would happen if this plan is it's has some kind of giant nuclear meltdown, that's certainly going to be problematic for both Kiev and Moscow. However, just due to the location of the plant that is controlled by Russian forces, it's in a largely it's in an area of Ukraine where Russia wants to take and annex more territory. So, the whole surrounding area of this power plant that they really want to have. And if they did that, of course, that would be just an environmental nightmare for Russia to have to deal with. Hugely expensive, would probably disrupt some things. Now, who knows exactly what's going on in the war, what's being planned in Moscow and Kiev, and why one side or the other may think it was a good idea to blow this up. Governments make irrational and poor decisions, and so I don't want to say there's no way Moscow would blow this up, but by strategy, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of benefits for Moscow. Now, you could look at the Ukrainian side and largely say the same thing, but I will say there's one kind of additional factor from the Ukrainian perspective, and that is a lot of American politicians have said that the Nets made one of the ways that the West would join the war in Ukraine and directly go to war with Russia in Ukraine is if there wasn't some kind of event in Ukraine that caused nuclear fallout to go into NATO states. And so, and I'm guessing that would happen here, that, nearby NATO states would probably be impacted, whether that's, I guess, Turkey, Poland, Hungary, Romania, these kinds of states. The Black Sea will probably be impacted, and so many of those states have interests in the Black Sea, have territory, coastline along the Black Sea. So if there is an incident at the ZMPP that causes a meltdown or some other nuclear catastrophe to occur at that plant, I think it's reasonable for Kiev to assess that based on how the West reacted to the Nord Stream pipeline and the dam explosion, that initially Russia is going to be blamed, and by the time anybody actually sits down and starts to look at what the logistics of this were, how Russia could have pulled it off, how Ukraine could have pulled it off, and things like that, the West will already be at war with Russia, and Zelensky will have gotten what he wanted, and then there really is no going back from there. So let's hope that nothing happens at the ZMPP. However, this should be a huge flashing red light for all of us in realizing that this war has to be wrapped up soon. Maybe it's not in July of 23 that this plant ends up having a meltdown, but it seems like if this war keeps going on and there's more and more military activity at and around this nuclear facility, the more likely something's going to happen there, and something really terrible that's going to kill an awful lot of people, and if not trigger a wider war between Moscow and NATO. So along with that, another really bad sign we have in this war is Zelensky says war won't end until Ukraine takes Crimea. Dave DeCamp wrote this up for antiwar.com on July 3rd. Ukrainian President Zelensky has reaffirmed his position that the war in Ukraine will not end until Ukrainian forces take Crimea. We cannot imagine Ukraine without Crimea, and while Crimea is under Russian occupation, it only means one thing: the war is not over yet. When asked if there was any scenario where there would be peace in Ukraine without Kiev controlling Crimea, Zelensky said it will not be a victory then. So this, obviously concerning, because it's very clear that Russia views Crimea as a part of Russia, and Russia will fight for Crimea as it would, any other part of Russian territory, and that it's held since 1991, since the fall of the Soviet Union. And so this is concerning that Zelensky maintains this position. Now, hopefully, behind the scenes, he realizes this can't be the expectation, but reasserting it, at this point in the war seems to just be adding to the provocations. And of course, I think Zelensky does want tensions between Russia and the West very, very high right now, as the NATO summit is next week in Lithuania. And there, the countries, the members of NATO are going to sign some kind of agreement that's going to make Ukraine more of a member of NATO than it already is. And they're going to give Ukraine a lot of weapons. And I think as far as Ukraine is concerned, the higher tensions are with Russia at that meeting and leading up to that meeting, the more political pressure they could ramp up in all these different countries to get more weapons and possibly a timeline on when Ukraine could join NATO. All right, one more major escalation going on here. Russia says Ukraine drone attacks on Moscow not possible without U.S. support. The Russian Foreign Ministry said Tuesday that Ukrainian drone attacks on Moscow and other areas inside Russia would not be possible without support from the U.S. and NATO. The comments came after the Russian military said it downed 5 drones that attacked Moscow on Tuesday morning, causing no casualties in the attack. These attacks would not be possible without the help provided to the Kiev regime by the U.S. and its NATO allies, the Russian Foreign Ministry said. The ministry added that the U.S. and NATO were training drone operators and providing the necessary intelligence to commit such crimes. Now, I don't just want to agree with the Russian Foreign Ministry, but I do think this is probably a reasonable assessment given how much Kiev has relied militarily on the West for targeting, for intelligence, and for weapons. It seems to me that if Washington did not want Kiev doing this, they could prevent Kiev from doing this, and they're probably providing some necessary support along the line to make this happen. So that, again, this is a major escalation. This is the West. I'm sure from Putin's perspective, from the perspective of the Kremlin and a lot of people inside of Russia, these are attacks from NATO on Russia, and very concerning. Now, it's not just the anti-war community that's concerned with the escalations going on, but Germany, 2 top German officials have expressed some concern regarding Western escalations in Ukraine and signaled Berlin could push back against the most provocative proposals. And I wrote this up for the Libertarian Institute on July 3rd. Top German officials expressed concern regarding Western escalations. So the first was Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who said Germany was reluctant to send longer-range weapons to Ukraine as the arms may be used to attack Russian territory. London has provided Kiev with Storm Shadow air-launched cruise missiles, which have a range of more than 155 miles. According to recent reporting, the White House is closing in on a decision to send Army tactical missile systems, also known as ATACMS, to Ukraine. Those rockets can be fired roughly 200 miles. Last month, the Russian defense minister warned the West that Ukraine using long-range weapons to attack the Crimean Peninsula could lead to direct war between Moscow and NATO. The use of those missiles outside the zones of our special military operation would mean that the United States and Britain would be fully dragged into the conflict and would entail immediate strikes on decision-making centers in Ukraine. Berlin is now receiving requests from Kiev to provide Taurus KEPD-350 missiles. It's an air-launched missile with a range of over 300 miles. Scholz says Germany is considering the request. Germany has been the subject of intense pressure throughout the war due to Berlin's reluctance at times to provide Kiev with all requested aid. However, in several instances, Berlin has caved to Kiev's demand. In one example, Germany resisted sending its Leopard 2 main battle tanks to Ukraine. After Poland, the UK, and US pledged to send advanced battle tanks, Germany agreed to send dozens of its Leopard 2s to Ukraine. Some of the German tanks have already been destroyed on the battlefield, and Kiev is asking Berlin for replacements. Meanwhile, the American Abrams tanks have not yet arrived in Ukraine. Berlin is additionally pushing back on plans to give Ukraine an official timeline for membership at the NATO summit in Vilnius next week. In an interview published in a Polish outlet on Monday, the German defense minister Boris Pistorius said the alliance would be unable to determine the war conditions determine the conditions for Kiev to join the alliance until after the conclusion of the war with Russia. In my recent meetings with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, we were once again in agreement that the alliance must never become a party to the conflict. Therefore, we will not be able to answer the question of Ukraine's ascension to NATO as long as the war continues in Ukraine. Pistorius went on to explain that Germany is committed to supporting Ukraine's war effort as long as the conflict continues. He says Berlin will be delivering dozens of older Leopard 1 battle tanks to Kiev in the coming weeks. And so I don't want people to be too optimistic about the German position here. I just want to point out that at least there is some pushback within the alliance. And I do think there's maybe a little bit of resistance in the White House, but there is a lot in Berlin as well. All right, so we were just talking about NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, and we have this article from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com from July 4th. NATO agrees to extend Secretary General Stoltenberg's term by 1 year. On Tuesday, NATO agreed to extend Stoltenberg's term by another year as the alliance wants to stick with a familiar leader amid its raging proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. Stoltenberg is a Norwegian politician and former Prime Minister of Norway who has led NATO since 2014, overseeing a period of increased tensions with Russia that led to the most dangerous security situation in Europe since World War II. With his steady leadership experience and judgment, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has brought our alliance through the most significant challenges in European security since World War II, President Biden said in a statement on NATO's decision. I look forward to continuing to work with Stoltenberg to further strengthen the alliance next week at the NATO summit in Vilnius and ahead of the 75th anniversary NATO summit in Washington, D.C. next year, Biden added. Ukraine also welcomed the news that Stoltenberg leading the alliance for another year. Excellent news. Tough times demand strong leadership. Jens Stoltenberg has demonstrated just that. I look forward to further cooperation. And that was from Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba. Stoltenberg has led the alliance through significantly increased support for Ukraine in the wake of the 2014 U.S.-backed coup that ousted former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. The alliance's relationship with Ukraine entered a new phase after Russia invaded last year, as Kiev's armed forces have been armed with tens of billions of dollars of NATO equipment. NATO is expected to give new commitments to Ukraine at the upcoming Vilnius summit, which will be held from July 11th to 12th. Since one of Russia's main motives for invading Ukraine's was Ukraine's alignment with NATO, whatever pledges Kiev receives in Vilnius will serve to prolong the war. All right. And then last article up here today. This is from our CIA Director, William Burns. He said in a speech on Saturday that the war in Ukraine provides his spy agency a once-in-the-lifetime opportunity to recruit Russians. Dissatisfaction with the war will continue to gnaw away at the Russian leadership beneath the steady diet of state propaganda and practice repression. That disaffection creates a once-in-a-generation opportunity for us at the CIA to at our core of human intelligence service. So he's, I guess, thinking that there's a lot more Russians that are upset with Putin than ever before because of the war, and this presents a real opportunity. I'm not so sure it's the case that, that this war has actually led the Russian people and the Russian leadership to rally against Putin. I'm sure there are some people who are maybe more upset and are occasionally willing to talk with the CIA or something like that. But if you look at support for Putin in Russia, it remains pretty strong and even stronger as this war goes on. And so, it's unclear to me if, at least at this point, that this war is actually negatively impacting Putin's hold on power. I think there's a lot of desire in the West to believe that it is, but I think that definitely remains to be seen. And at this point, seems more like White House propaganda than the truth. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show today. I'll be back with another show on Thursday with Connor Freeman. And then next week, me and Connor are going to Freedom Fest. So I'm not sure what it means for the schedule of the show yet. Maybe we'll record something while we're there. Either that or we will post one of our speeches from Pork Fest a couple weeks ago to run as an episode later next week. So there should still be 3 episodes next week. Anyways, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in.